The Last Stand of Colony 50. The Arrival of the Eternal Dominion. High Commander Varric stood tall at the helm of the Eternal Dominion, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back. His cold, reptilian eyes narrowed as he gazed out of the panoramic view screen. Before him lay a dust-ridden human mining colony, Colony 50, as they called it. Varric scoffed. This was a pathetic resistance effort. The Empire had faced countless wars across the galaxy, crushing rebellious factions, annihilating entire civilizations, and subjugating species who dared defy them. Yet, somehow, the humans still clung to their defiance like an insect struggling in a web. Commander, one of his officers, a lower-ranked Zurian soldier, spoke from the control deck. "Our forces have surrounded the colony. The resistance is laughable. No visible military assets, just a scattering of civilians and workers." Varric sighed, turning to the officer with a look of boredom. "Then wipe them out. Show them what happens to those who resist the Eternal Dominion." With a flick of his wrist, Varric gave the command, and the battleships hovering in low orbit prepared their energy cannons. The people of Colony 50 would be reduced to nothing more than a memory in a matter of minutes. At least that was the plan. The mechanic, who wouldn't back down. Inside one of the crumbling warehouses at the heart of Colony 50, a lone figure sat on an overturned crate. Her name was Eleanor Ellie Briggs, a former mechanic for the Terran Defense Force, now just a grease-stained worker in a dying colony. She wiped the sweat off her forehead with her sleeve, smudging oil across her face. Outside, the alarms blared, signaling impending doom. But Ellie didn't move. She simply adjusted the grip on the large, well-worn wrench in her hands. Most of the colonists had already flowed into underground bunkers, but Ellie had seen enough war to know how this would end. The Empire didn't negotiate. They didn't show mercy. They exterminated anything that got in their way. She rolled her shoulders and cracked her neck. "Guess I better give them a proper welcome." Ellie had fought in wars before. She had seen friends die, planets burn, and civilizations erased. The bureaucrats and military leaders of Earth had long since given up on remote colonies like this. To them, Colony 50 was already lost. But Ellie refused to go down without a fight. The battle begins. The first strike came from above. Bright beams of energy rained down from the Imperial battleships, scorching the landscape, reducing buildings to rubble. Automated turrets scattered across the colony fired back in a desperate attempt to slow the onslaught. It was hopeless. From the ground, massive dropships descended, unloading squads of alien soldiers, Zurian enforcers, towering reptilian creatures clad in obsidian armor. Their weapons hummed with lethal energy as they fanned out, hunting down survivors. Ellie crouched behind a supply crate, heart pounding. She gripped her wrench tighter. "All right, let's do this." As the first Zurian patrol approached her position, she spotted an abandoned power loader, a massive Bechtel industrial mech used for heavy lifting. It wasn't a combat machine, but it would have to do. Ellie sprinted toward it, diving inside the cockpit. The screens flickered to life. "Come on, baby, don't fail me now." She overrode the safety protocols, bypassing the standard startup sequence. With a mechanical groan, the loader stood up, its hydraulic arms hissing. Just as the first squad of Zurian warriors rounded the corner, Ellie took control of the loader's massive gripping claws and swung. The nearest alien was sent flying into a wall with a sickening crunch. "That's one," Ellie muttered. "A one-woman army." The other aliens roared, raising their weapons, but Ellie was already moving. She grabbed a fuel canister from the wreckage and hurled it at the squad. A well-placed strike from the loader's claw sent it bursting into flames, engulfing the Zurians in an explosion. More enemies arrived, their weapons tearing through the loader's armor. Sparks flew as Ellie fought back, smashing through soldiers, using anything she could find. Pipes, tools, even scrap metal. Then the loader's power cell finally gave out. With a dying whine, the machine slumped, leaving Ellie exposed. "Well, crap," she muttered. She jumped out just as a Zurian commander approached, its weapon raised. The alien sneered. "You fight like a desperate insect, human." Ellie smirked, twirling her wrench. "That's funny, because last I checked, I'm still standing, and your buddies aren't." The commander snarled and lunged, but Ellie was faster. She ducked under his strike and brought the wrench down with all her strength. The impact sent a shockwave up her arm, cracking the alien's skull plate. The Zurian collapsed. Ellie yanked a plasma rifle from the fallen soldier's grip. "Let's see how you like a taste of your own medicine." A spark of hope. As Ellie took down enemies one by one, the surviving colonists began to emerge. Seeing her fight back inspired them. A group of engineers rallied behind her, arming themselves with makeshift weapons. Miners repurposed their drilling equipment into deadly tools. Scientists activated defense drones that had long been disabled. The people of Colony 50 were done running. By the time the next wave of Imperial forces arrived, they found themselves met with fierce resistance. Ellie led the charge, her wrench in one hand, a plasma rifle in the other. "Come on, you scaly bastards," she yelled. "Let's see what you've got." The battle for Colony 50 had begun in earnest. The Empire takes notice. High Commander Varric scowled as he watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. "This is unexpected," his officer admitted. "What is?" Varric growled. "The humans. They're fighting back." Varric's grip tightened. He zoomed in on the battlefield feed, focusing on one figure, a single human woman, cutting through his elite forces with nothing but a wrench and sheer audacity. "That one," Varric muttered. His eyes narrowed. "That one is dangerous." He turned to his officers. "Deploy the Reapers. Wipe her and the colony from existence." The next wave of the invasion would not be so easy to repel. The Empire was done playing games. The Reapers arrive. The calm before the storm. Ellie Briggs wiped the sweat from her forehead, her breath ragged as she surveyed the battlefield. The bodies of fallen Zurian warriors littered the colony streets, their armor cracked, their weapons abandoned. Smoke billowed from wrecked alien dropships, their twisted metal still smoldering. The colonists, once terrified miners and engineers, were now bloodied but resolute fighters, standing behind Ellie, gripping whatever weapons they could scavenge. The initial attack had been repelled, but everyone knew this wasn't over. Ellie exhaled sharply, gripping her wrench tightly. "All right, we bought ourselves some time," she said, addressing the ragtag group of survivors. "But we all know what happens next." Dr. Calloway, the colony's lead scientist, nodded grimly. "They won't accept defeat, not from us. The Empire doesn't just take losses and walk away." Ellie looked up at the sky, where the massive battleship Eternal Dominion loomed like a predator watching its wounded prey. "No," she muttered, "they're going to hit us harder." She was right. The Empire unleashes the Reapers. High Commander Varric stood in the command center of his flagship, his scaled fingers tapping against the polished metal console. His eyes burned with fury as he watched the battle footage. His soldiers, his warriors, had been taken down by a single human and a band of laborers. "This is unacceptable," he growled. The officers surrounding him remained silent, afraid to draw his wrath. But Varric's second-in-command, a towering Zurian named Sotek, stepped forward. "Commander, if I may." Varric turned, his patience thin. "Speak." Sotek gestured toward a holographic display. It showed a fleet of sleek, black-armored warriors, taller, stronger, faster than the standard Zurian soldiers. Their bodies were enhanced with cybernetic augments, and their weapons pulsed with advanced plasma energy. "The Reapers," Sotek said with a grin. "We have them aboard. If you truly wish to erase this colony, we deploy them now." Varric narrowed his eyes, considering. The Reapers were not mere soldiers. They were the Empire's executioners. They were sent to planets not just to conquer, but to annihilate. No survivors, no resistance, No hope. A slow smile crept across Varric's face. Send them in. First contact with death itself. Ellie had barely caught her breath when the colony's early warning system blared to life again. Alert. New hostile dropships inbound. Energy signatures. Unknown configuration. She spun around, staring at the sky. Sure enough, fresh dropships were descending. But these weren't like the clunky Zurian troop transports from earlier. These were sleek, black, and silent, like ghosts cutting through the clouds. Damn it, Ellie muttered. The ships hovered over the colony for a moment, as if scanning, choosing their targets. Then, with a terrifying precision, they deployed their payload. Figures leaped from the ships, not dropping, but floating, their movements unnatural, almost inhuman. They touched down without a sound, standing eerily still. Ellie felt a chill crawl up her spine. Oh, that's not good. The Reapers had arrived. The Reapers' attack. For a moment, no one moved. The colonists, gripping their weapons, hesitated. These new enemies didn't react like the Zurian soldiers. They didn't roar. They didn't threaten. They just stood there. Then, without warning, they struck. In a blur of motion, the Reapers launched forward, too fast for the eye to follow. A miner barely had time to raise his plasma rifle before a Reaper's blade sliced through him. He collapsed in two separate pieces before he even knew he was dead. Another colonist fired, but the Reaper dodged effortlessly, as if predicting the attack before it even happened. It lunged, driving a cybernetic fist through the shooter's chest, pulling it out with eerie precision. Ellie cursed. Fall back. Fall back. The colonists scrambled, running for cover, but the Reapers pursued them with terrifying efficiency. Ellie raised her stolen Zurian plasma rifle and fired. A Reaper turned, dodging the first few shots, but Ellie anticipated the dodge and adjusted her aim mid-shot. The final blast struck the Reaper's shoulder, sending it staggering back. For the first time, one of the creatures hesitated. Ellie grinned despite the chaos. So, you're not invincible. She charged forward, swinging her wrench at the wounded Reaper. It caught the strike midair, but Ellie had already expected that. She twisted the wrench, using leverage rather than strength, snapping the Reaper's wrist. It recoiled, its cybernetic enhancements sparking. But it didn't scream, didn't react to pain. Instead, it analyzed. Ellie's gut told her exactly what was happening. They're learning, she whispered. The battle turns grim. Despite her minor victory, Ellie knew they were losing. The Reapers were adapting to their tactics, adjusting their movements, countering attacks. What worked once would never work again. We can't fight them like normal soldiers, Dr. Calloway shouted, ducking behind cover. They're machines as much as they are warriors. We need a new plan. Ellie gritted her teeth. Then let's give them something they can't predict. She grabbed a nearby plasma grenade and didn't throw it. Instead, she jammed it into a fallen power generator. The explosion didn't kill a Reaper. It took out an entire power relay, plunging a section of the colony into darkness. Ellie smirked. They're good at fighting. Let's see how they do in total chaos. Turning the tables. The colonists followed Ellie's lead. Instead of fighting directly, they began to turn the battlefield into a trap. Explosions ripped through infrastructure, collapsing buildings onto the Reapers. Engineers disabled power grids, forcing the Reapers to fight without their enhanced vision. Miners triggered underground gas leaks, creating unpredictable firebombs. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Ellie led a coordinated strike, using the colony's own industrial machines, cranes, loaders, automated drills, as weapons. The Reapers, designed for direct combat, struggled against the unconventional warfare. One by one, they began to fall. A desperate gamble. But victory was far from certain. Ellie knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The Reapers were still adapting, and for everyone they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. They needed to end this now. Ellie's mind raced. The Eternal Dominion was still in orbit, controlling the Reapers remotely. If they could disrupt the connection. Her eyes darted toward the colony's communications tower, the tallest structure in Colony 50. "I have a really stupid idea," Ellie muttered. Dr. Calloway sighed. "Those are usually the best ones." Ellie sprinted toward the tower, dodging enemy fire, knowing that if she failed, there would be no second chance. As she climbed, Reapers pursued her, but she fought them off, using every ounce of strength, skill, and sheer determination she had left. She reached the top, just as the Empire's fleet locked onto her position. "Come on, you bastards," she muttered, pulling out the last grenade she had. She jammed it into the tower's control panel, whispering, "For Colony 50. Then she jumped. As she fell, the tower exploded in a blinding wave of energy, disrupting every Reaper in the colony. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, Ellie hit the ground, gasping. She had survived. And the Reapers were gone. The Empire's wrath. Silence before the storm. Ellie Briggs lay on the cold, cracked ground, gasping for air. The blast from the communications tower had sent her tumbling hard onto the debris-ridden streets of Colony 50. Her entire body ached, and her ears rang from the explosion. The sky was eerily quiet. No more Reapers. The towering black-armored assassins had fallen, their connection to the Eternal Dominion severed. The colonists, covered in dirt and blood, stood frozen in shock. They had won, at least for now. Ellie forced herself onto her elbows, coughing up dust. "We did it," she muttered. "Damn it, we actually did it." Dr. Calloway rushed to her side, his coat torn and stained. "Ellie, you okay?" She groaned, gripping her side. "Define okay." A relieved chuckle spread through the surviving colonists. Against all odds, they had pushed back the most feared executioners in the Empire. But Ellie knew better than to celebrate just yet. She turned her gaze to the heavens, where the Eternal Dominion, the flagship of High Commander Varric, still loomed like a vengeful god. And gods did not take kindly to defiance. High Commander Varric's fury. On board the Eternal Dominion, High Commander Varric stood motionless, his clawed hands gripping the command console so tightly that the metal bent beneath his fingers. His cold, reptilian eyes burned with pure rage. The Reapers had failed. His most elite warriors had been destroyed by a handful of miners and engineers, led by a single human mechanic. Unacceptable. Sotek, his second-in-command, dared to speak. "Commander, the Reapers were compromised when the communications tower was destroyed. Their connection was severed." Varric turned slowly, his voice deathly quiet. "Are you telling me that a handful of untrained workers defeated my finest warriors because of a single comms tower?" Sotek swallowed hard. "It would seem so, sir." A sudden crack echoed through the bridge as Varric snapped Sotek's neck with one swift motion. The officer collapsed, lifeless. The rest of the bridge crew froze. No one dared to move. Varric exhaled slowly, controlling his fury. This is not over. His gaze returned to the planet below. The humans had their little victory, but Varric would erase this colony from existence. "Prepare the Hellfire Protocol," he commanded. The officers on deck hesitated. One of them, a trembling Zurian, spoke cautiously. "Yes, sir, the Hellfire Protocol. It's a planetary extermination weapon. The colony is still valuable for mining." Varric's lip curled in disgust. "I don't care. I want this rock turned into a glass crater." The crew scrambled to obey. Colony 50 had defied the Empire, and for that, it would burn. A desperate plan. Ellie could feel it. Something was coming. She didn't need scanners or tech to tell her that the fight wasn't over. She turned to Dr. Calloway. "We need to get off this rock. Now." Calloway frowned. "We don't have ships, Ellie. The Empire destroyed our transports when they attacked." Ellie clenched her jaw. "Then we steal one." The colonists stared at her like she was insane. "Steal a ship." One of them asked. Ellie crossed her arms, What, you think they're just gonna let us live after all this? They're pissed. I guarantee they're planning to nuke us from orbit. A tense silence settled over the crowd. No one doubted her words. Calloway sighed. All right, let's say we steal one of their ships. How do we even get close enough? Ellie grinned. We use the Reaper's bodies. The colonists looked at her in confusion. Ellie smirked. I have an idea. Disguised among the dead, Ellie and a small team of colonists scavenged the battlefield, stripping the fallen Reapers of their armor. It was risky, dangerous, and more than a little disgusting, but it was their best shot. The Reapers were nearly the same size as humans, and their suits were designed for full enclosure, meaning no one could see the face inside. Ellie slid into a black armored Reaper suit, adjusting the weight. It was heavier than she expected, but she could move in it. The others did the same, their disguises crude but effective. All right, Ellie said through the helmet's comms. We walk like them, act like them, and get inside one of their ships. Once we're in, we improvise. The colonists nodded grimly. There was no room for error. Infiltrating the enemy. Ellie and her disguised team approached one of the still active Reaper dropships. Imperial forces were still regrouping, retrieving what they could from the battle. A Zurian officer spotted them and barked a command. Reapers. Report status. Ellie stiffened. The Reapers never spoke. How the hell was she supposed to answer? She did the only thing that made sense. She nodded once and kept walking. The Zurian hesitated but didn't stop them. Ellie nearly exhaled in relief. They reached the dropship's boarding ramp and hurried inside. The interior was sleek and cold, full of weapon racks and control panels. We're in, Ellie whispered. Calloway activated the ship's systems, bypassing the Empire's security using stolen Reaper data. All right, I think I can pilot this thing. Before they could lift off, a new alarm blared. Hellfire protocol engage. Colony destruction imminent. Ellie's stomach dropped. They were out of time. Escape from Colony 50. Calloway punched the throttle, and the stolen dropship roared to life, lifting off just as Eternal Dominion fired its main cannon. A beam of searing red energy shot down from the battleship, striking Colony 50's core. The ground ruptured. The colony's underground tunnels collapsed. Fire and destruction engulfed everything. Ellie watched in horror as the place she had called home was obliterated in an instant. They had escaped, but barely. She clenched her fists. They didn't have to do that, she whispered. They could have just taken the colony. But they wanted to erase us. Calloway steered the ship toward deep space. Ellie, we're alive. That has to count for something. Ellie stared out at the black void of space, her anger simmering. This isn't over, she muttered. Not by a long shot. As the stolen Reaper ship sped away, alarms on the Eternal Dominion flashed. High Commander Varric narrowed his eyes. Track that vessel, he ordered. I want that mechanic found. Hunted in the void. Nowhere left to hide. Ellie Briggs sat in the dimly lit cockpit of the stolen Reaper dropship, her fingers drumming anxiously against the cold metal console. The stolen vessel drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, its energy signatures suppressed. They had escaped Colony 50, but they weren't safe, not by a long shot. Dr. Calloway sat beside her, running diagnostics on the ship's battered systems. We need a plan, he muttered. They'll be tracking us. Ellie clenched her jaw. I know. Through the ship's viewport, she could see the distant glow of Eternal Dominion, the Empire's flagship, still hovering over the remains of Colony 50. The Hellfire Protocol had reduced her home to a smoldering ruin. Everyone who hadn't escaped was gone, not just killed, but erased. And now, they were being hunted. Ellie exhaled slowly. How long do we have before they lock onto us? A young engineer named Harlan, one of the few colonists who had made it aboard, grimaced as he studied the ship's readouts. Not long. Their tracking systems are state-of-the-art. They'll pick up our ion trail in under an hour. Ellie muttered a curse. They were flying a stolen Empire dropship. Every system in this vessel screamed enemy territory. They needed a way to disappear, fast. The Empire's relentless pursuit. High Commander Varric stood motionless on the bridge of Eternal Dominion, his reptilian eyes locked onto a holographic map of the sector. The stolen dropship's trajectory was displayed in real time, its faint ion trail glowing against the star-studded background. "They are trying to run," Varric said, his voice cold. A subordinate officer nodded. "They're headed towards Sector 12, an uncharted region full of asteroid fields and debris clouds. Difficult to navigate." Varric's lips curled into a smirk. Difficult for most. He turned toward his tactical officer. "Deploy the Phantom Hunters." The officer stiffened. "The Phantom Hunters? Sir, they're assassins, not starfighter pilots." Varric's gaze darkened. "I don't need pilots. I need killers." The Phantom Hunters were the Empire's deadliest Black Ops units, trained to kill without mercy. They didn't engage in battles. They ended them before they started. "Send them," Varric ordered. "I want Briggs and her people dead before they leave this sector." The order was given. And the hunt began. A desperate gamble. Ellie gritted her teeth as alarms blared across the stolen dropship's controls. "They found us," Harlan shouted. The ship's sensors picked up 3 enemy vessels, small, sleek, and deadly. They weren't standard Imperial ships. These were Phantom-class interceptors, silent killers designed for stealth and speed. Ellie grabbed the flight controls. "Hold on." She yanked the ship into a sharp dive, skimming dangerously close to a nearby asteroid belt. The stolen dropship wasn't designed for maneuverability, but she had no choice. The first Phantom Hunter ship opened fire. Bright blue energy bolts ripped through space, narrowly missing their hull. Ellie cursed under her breath. "They're fast." Calloway, gripping his seat, shouted, "We can't outrun them. We have to fight." Ellie's eyes darted across the cockpit. They had no weapons. This was a transport ship, not a fighter. But they had brains. She glanced at the asteroid field ahead. "Maybe we can't fight them, but we can make them fight the rocks." Into the storm. Ellie pushed the engines to maximum, diving straight into the chaotic mess of floating debris. The asteroid belt was a swirling mass of metal wreckage, shattered moons, and drifting space ice, a graveyard of ancient battles long forgotten. Behind them, the Phantom Hunters followed, undaunted. "They're still on us," Harlan yelled. Ellie narrowed her eyes. "Then let's see if they can dance." She cut the ship's power for 3 seconds, allowing it to drift silently through a dense patch of debris. The maneuver threw off the Phantom Hunter's targeting systems. One of the pursuers overcorrected and slammed into an asteroid at full speed. The ship exploded into a blinding fireball. Ellie smirked. 1 down. But the other 2 were smarter. They adjusted their flight patterns, moving with the asteroids rather than against them. Ellie exhaled sharply. "All right. Plan B." Calloway frowned. "Plan B." Ellie jerked the ship into a spin, hurtling straight toward a massive derelict star cruiser lodged between 2 asteroids. It was an ancient warship, its hull rusted and broken from centuries of space exposure. "We're hiding in that," Ellie announced. Harlan's eyes widened. That thing could collapse at any second. Ellie grinned. "Then let's hope they're too scared to follow." She punched the thrusters and shot inside the wrecked ship. The ghosts of the past. The moment the stolen dropship entered the wreckage, everything went dark. The ship's lights flickered as electromagnetic interference scrambled the onboard systems. Ellie slowed their speed, navigating through the twisted, abandoned corridors of the massive warship. The place was a tomb, silent, eerie, and filled with the remains of long-dead soldiers still strapped into their chairs. "This place gives me the creeps," Harlan muttered. Ellie kept her eyes on the sensors. "Creepy or not, it's keeping us alive." The Phantom Hunters didn't follow immediately. They hovered outside, scanning the wreckage, searching for signs of life. Ellie exhaled. They had a few minutes. She turned to Calloway. "Can we do anything to disrupt their scans?" Calloway rubbed his chin. "The ship's systems are dead, but if I can reactivate the distress beacon, it might send out a feedback loop that scrambles their targeting sensors." "Do it," Ellie ordered. Calloway got to work. Minutes later, an ancient distress signal crackled to life. The Phantom Hunters' scanners glitched out, their ships flickering on the radar. Ellie seized the opportunity. "Time to go," she whispered. She reignited the engines and blasted out of the wreckage. Straight past the blind Phantom Hunters. By the time they realized what had happened, it was too late. Ellie and her team were already gone, vanishing into the void. A Pyrrhic victory. On the bridge of Eternal Dominion, High Commander Varric watched the sensor feed in silence. His Phantom Hunters had failed. The humans had escaped. Again. For the first time in years, Varric felt something unfamiliar: frustration. He had underestimated this mechanic. She had done more damage to the Empire's plans than entire armies. No more mistakes. Varric turned to his officers. "Deploy the Starbreaker fleet." A collective silence fell across the bridge. The Starbreaker fleet was not a hunting squad. It was not an extermination force. It was a declaration of absolute war. "Wherever Briggs runs, we burn the sector around her," Varric said, his voice ice-cold. "She will have nowhere left to hide." The war had only just begun. The Starbreaker fleet. Nowhere is safe. Ellie Briggs leaned against the cold metal bulkhead of the stolen Reaper dropship, her breathing shallow. The dim emergency lighting flickered in the cramped interior as her crew worked frantically to assess the damage. They had barely escaped the Phantom Hunters, using the wreckage of an ancient warship as cover. But they weren't in the clear, not even close. The Empire wouldn't make the same mistake again. "We need to find a place to lay low," Dr. Calloway said, scanning star charts on a flickering holotable. "Somewhere off-grid, no trade routes, no Imperial patrols." Ellie ran a hand through her sweat-drenched hair, glancing at the exhausted colonists huddled near the back of the ship. Their faces were gaunt, eyes hollow. They had lost everything when Colony 50 was destroyed. They were fugitives now. Harlan, the young engineer, looked up from the pilot's chair. "I got something. A dead world on the fringes of Imperial space. No settlements, no military presence. It's just a chunk of rock with a breathable atmosphere." Ellie nodded. "Set course. We need to regroup and figure out our next move." The ship's engines hummed as they jumped into hyperspace. But deep down, Ellie knew they were running out of places to hide. The Starbreaker fleet moves. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, High Commander Varric stood motionless, watching the holographic war map in front of him. His Starbreaker fleet had begun to move, 10 capital-class warships, each capable of turning a planet to ash. This wasn't just a hunt anymore. This was a purge. An officer approached, saluting. "Sir, we've located the stolen dropship's last known coordinates. They made a hyperspace jump, but their drive signatures suggest they're heading toward the Perdition Expanse, a barren system." Varric's reptilian eyes gleamed with amusement. "A barren system." "Yes, sir. No civilizations, no trade routes, nothing but dead planets and asteroid fields." A slow smile crept across Varric's lips. "Then they're trapped." He turned to his fleet commanders. "Deploy the net. We will surround the Perdition Expanse on all sides. Make sure no ship, not even a single escape pod, leaves that system." The officers saluted and relayed the orders. The Empire's grip was closing in, and Ellie Briggs was about to find herself in the deadliest trap of all: a wasteland refuge. The stolen dropship emerged from hyperspace above a desolate planet. The surface was a barren wasteland, covered in jagged rock formations and endless dust storms. It was lifeless. "Not exactly paradise," Harlan muttered as he guided the ship toward a rocky canyon for cover. Ellie tightened her seatbelt as the ship rattled violently, struggling against the planet's turbulent atmosphere. "Just get us down in one piece." Harlan maneuvered the vessel into a deep ravine, hiding them from long-range scanners. The ship landed with a heavy thud, kicking up a storm of dust. For a moment, everything was silent. Ellie exhaled. "All right. We're down. Now what?" Dr. Calloway looked around. "We need supplies, and we need to repair the ship's jump drive. If we can find even one functional comm relay, we might be able to intercept Imperial transmissions." Ellie stood up, rolling her shoulders. "Then let's move." The ghost signal. Ellie led a small team across the barren landscape, their boots crunching against dry, cracked earth. After hours of searching, they stumbled upon something unexpected. A ruined facility buried beneath layers of rock and dust. Harlan adjusted his visor, scanning the structure. "Looks like an old military outpost, but not Imperial." Ellie's brow furrowed. If it's not Imperial, then who built it? They forced their way inside, stepping into a dark, abandoned control room. Dust and debris covered ancient consoles, but one screen still flickered dimly. Calloway wiped away the grime and read the faint text. "GSCBLACKSIT 42. Project LONGHAUBL." Ellie narrowed her eyes. "GSC. That's old Earth tech." Harlan frowned. "How old are we talking?" Calloway's expression darkened. "Pre-Empire. From back when humanity was still expanding into the stars." Ellie's fingers traced the dusty console. "So what the hell is a classified Earth outpost doing out here?" Before anyone could answer, the screen flashed to life. "Incoming transmission TTT'd." The crew tensed. The message was old, distorted, but someone, or something, had activated it. A broken voice crackled through the speakers. "To any survivors, this is Captain Jonah Reeve. Project Longhaul was compromised. Do not trust." Static consumed the rest of the message. Ellie's stomach twisted. That wasn't Imperial. Calloway paled. No, that was a human distress call, and it had been broadcasting for over a century. The Empire's net closes in. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the Starbreaker fleet arrived. The Perdition Expanse was surrounded. No ships in, no ships out. Varric stood on the command deck of Eternal Dominion, watching as his forces deployed massive gravity wells to prevent hyperspace jumps. "The noose is tight," one of his officers reported. Varric nodded. "Then let's start the extermination." A fleet-wide message was broadcast. "To the fugitives hiding in this sector, there is nowhere left to run. Surrender or be erased." Varric smiled cruelly. This time, there would be no escape. The final stand. Back at the ruined outpost, Ellie's team frantically worked to access the remaining systems. Calloway scanned the data. The distress call. It came from an underground hangar. There might still be a working ship down there. Ellie's heart pounded. "Then we move now." As they sprinted toward the lower levels, the ground rumbled. Ellie's comm crackled with static before a panicked voice broke through. "Ellie, it's Harlan. The Empire found us. They're coming in hot. Heavy bombers and ground troops." Ellie clenched her fists. They weren't escaping. Not this time. They were making a last stand. The forgotten warship. A race against time. Dust and debris shook from the walls of the ruined outpost as the ground trembled beneath Ellie's boots. The Empire had found them. She sprinted down the dimly lit corridors, her breath ragged. Harlan's voice crackled through her comm unit. Panicked. Urgent. "Ellie, Imperial bombers just dropped out of orbit. They're preparing an airstrike." Ellie cursed under her breath. They were out of time. Behind her, Dr. Calloway and the remaining colonists struggled to keep up. They had one shot, a single chance to find whatever was buried beneath this base and pray that it could get them off this doomed world. Ellie turned a sharp corner, nearly slipping on loose gravel, And there it was, a massive blast door, towering at least 20 feet high, half buried under collapsed rock and sand. The faded letters across its surface sent a chill down her spine. GSCBLATCKSTE 42. Pro GCTLONGJ. Ellie's stomach twisted. This thing is old Earth tech. How the hell did it end up buried here? Calloway, panting, ran his hands over the rusted control panel. If this door leads to an old warship, it might still have working launch systems. Ellie clenched her fists. Then open it. Now. Calloway worked fast, hacking into the corroded controls. Sparks flew as he forced a bypass into the security lock. Then, a low groan echoed through the ruins. The massive doors shuddered, then slowly began to part, revealing a dark abyss beyond. Ellie tightened her grip on her plasma rifle. Move. Now. Buried in the dark. The corridor beyond the blast doors was a graveyard of forgotten war tech. Dust-covered control panels lined the walls, flickering weakly as emergency systems attempted to reboot after a century of silence. At the far end of the chamber, Ellie saw it, a hulking behemoth of metal, half hidden beneath layers of rock and collapsed debris. An ancient Earth warship. Its hull was rusted, its once proud markings barely visible beneath the dust of time. GSCREVNANT was printed across its bow. Harlan's voice was filled with disbelief. This thing is pre-Empire. How the hell is it still intact? Calloway moved to a side console, wiping away layers of dirt. Because it was meant to be hidden. His fingers danced across the keypad, activating a diagnostic scan. The ship's old systems flickered to life. A deep mechanical voice crackled over the speakers. Warning. Stasis lock engage. Reactor offline. Emergency wake-up protocol initiated. Ellie's pulse quickened. If this thing can still fly, she said, we're getting the hell out of here. But before Calloway could respond, the entire facility shook violently. A new voice screamed over the comms. Ellie, they've started the bombing run. GT out of there. The Starbreaker fleet attacks. In the skies above, Imperial bombers descended like hunting birds, their payloads glowing with lethal energy. The first wave of explosives rained down, sending shockwaves across the wasteland. The ruined outpost erupted in flames, sending plumes of fire and smoke skyward. On the bridge of Eternal Dominion, High Commander Varric watched the destruction unfold with satisfaction. The fugitives are trapped, an officer reported. They have nowhere to run. Varric smiled. Then bury them. He leaned forward, launched the ground forces. No survivors. Hundreds of dropships deployed from the Starbreaker fleet, descending toward the war-torn wasteland like a swarm of metallic insects. Ellie and her people weren't just outgunned. They were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Activating a ghost ship. Inside the buried warship, Ellie slammed her fist against the control panel. How fast can we get this thing running? Calloway's fingers flew across the console. Reactors cold. This ship's been dormant for over 100 years. We need time to warm it up. Ellie glanced at the exit. Time was the one thing they didn't have. Outside, explosions rocked the facility. The first wave of Zurian shock troops had arrived, their weapons glowing in the darkness. Harlan shouted, "We've got company." Ellie grabbed her wrench and plasma rifle. "Then we hold them off until this ship is ready to fly." She charged toward the entrance, her colonists right behind her. A desperate last stand. The first wave of Zurian warriors stormed into the ruined base, their plasma rifles blazing. Ellie and her fighters took cover behind old wreckage, returning fire with everything they had. A young colonist beside her screamed as an energy blast took him down. Ellie gritted her teeth, firing back. One Zurian dropped, then another. But they kept coming. Ellie's plasma rifle overheated. She dropped it and swung her wrench, cracking the skull of the nearest enemy. Blood sprayed as the alien collapsed. She grabbed his weapon and kept fighting. They weren't going to last much longer. The Revenant awakens. Deep inside the warship, Calloway fought to bypass old security locks, his hands shaking. Come on, he muttered. Then, a low hum filled the air. The ship's reactor came online. Ellie heard the deep mechanical roar of engines waking from their century-long sleep. Calloway shouted over the comms. Ellie, get back. The ship's ready. Ellie didn't hesitate. Everyone fall back. Move. Her team sprinted for the open loading ramp as more Zurian troops flooded the ruins. Ellie was the last aboard. As she jumped onto the ramp, she turned and saw a massive Zurian commander raising his plasma cannon. He fired. Ellie braced for impact, but the shot never came. A massive turret on the warship swiveled and fired, obliterating the commander in a single blast. Ellie's eyes widened. The ship's weapons are operational. Calloway grinned from the bridge. Looks like it. Escape from perdition. Ellie sprinted to the bridge, taking the captain's chair as Calloway worked the controls. Outside, the Empire's forces were closing in fast. Bombers, gunships, ground troops, all converging on their position. Harlan shouted, "More Imperial ships inbound. We're boxed in." Ellie gripped the controls. Not for long. She punched the thrusters. The GSC Revenant, a forgotten relic of war, rose from its grave. Dust and debris exploded outward as the massive warship broke free from the ruins, its thrusters roaring against the wasteland. Ellie locked onto the Starbreaker fleet. Let's give 'em hell. She fired the ship's main cannons. Massive plasma bolts ripped through the sky, tearing apart enemy dropships in a single blast. The Empire wasn't expecting this. The chase was over. Now, Ellie was fighting back. Warpath. No more running. Ellie Briggs gripped the controls of the GSC Revenant, her heart pounding. The Starbreaker fleet loomed ahead, a wall of Imperial warships, their weapons locked onto her. For weeks, she had been running. Now, for the first time, she had something to fight back with. Ellie. Dr. Calloway's voice crackled through the comms. We can still run. The ship's jump drive is active. Ellie's gaze hardened as she stared at the Empire's forces. No, she wasn't running anymore. She leaned forward, fingers tightening over the controls. We're taking the fight to them. A slow grin spread across Harlan's face. Now we're talking. High Commander Varric's mistake. On the bridge of Eternal Dominion, High Commander Varric watched as the ancient warship ascended from the ruins. His eyes narrowed. That ship, Varric muttered, studying the hull. He recognized its design, not Imperial, but older. Sir, an officer interrupted. The vessel is powering up. Its weapons systems are active. Varric's jaw clenched. Impossible. The ship was a relic, buried for a century. It shouldn't even be operational. He turned to his fleet commanders. Destroy it. Now. The Empire's warships locked onto the Revenant and opened fire. A warship reborn. Ellie braced herself as hundreds of plasma blasts streaked through space, headed straight for the Revenant. Calloway slammed a control panel, activating the ship's deflector shields. A translucent energy field flared to life around them. The first wave of enemy fire slammed into the shields, sending shockwaves rippling through the hull. But they held. Ellie smirked. This ship wasn't just old, it was a fortress. Harlan's fingers danced over the weapons console. Primary cannons are online. Railguns operational. We've got enough firepower to turn those Starbreaker ships into space dust. Ellie's pulse quickened. Then let's start breaking stars. She slammed the trigger. The first strike. The GSC Revenant fired its main plasma cannon. A massive energy beam surged forward, ripping straight through an Imperial battlecruiser. The enemy ship exploded in a brilliant fireball, debris scattering into the void. For the first time in his career, High Commander Varric felt shock. His fleet, his invincible Starbreaker fleet, was being torn apart by a single ship. Sir, we lost the Iron Fang. The Revenant's weapons air. Varric slammed his fist into the command console. I can see that. The Empire's forces scrambled, repositioning their formations. Ellie grinned. Oh, they weren't expecting this. She turned to Harlan. Target the flagship. Harlan hesitated. You mean Eternal Dominion? Ellie nodded. Varric wants us dead. Let's see if he's willing to bleed for it. The Empire strikes back. Varric clenched his jaw as he watched the battlefield unfold. This wasn't a battle. It was a disaster. His ships were falling, their weapons outmatched by a ship from the past. He turned to his officers. Deploy the Titan breakers. The bridge crew stiffened. Sir, the Titan breakers are only used against. I don't care, Varric snarled. Launch them. From the heart of the Starbreaker fleet, 3 massive dreadnoughts emerged. They were monsters, each the size of a city, bristling with weapons powerful enough to shatter moons. The Titan breakers had never failed a battle. Until now. The Revenant versus the Titan breakers. Ellie's eyes widened as the massive dreadnoughts loomed ahead. They just brought out the big guns, Harlan muttered. Calloway scanned the Titan breakers. If those things hit us, we're done. Ellie gritted her teeth. Then we don't let them. She turned to the weapons console. Do we still have control over the Railvin batteries? Harlan nodded. Fully loaded. Ellie's expression darkened. Then we punch a hole right through them. She fired. The Revenant's railguns roared, launching kinetic slugs at near-light speed. The first Titan breaker took a direct hit. Its armor shattered, and a massive shockwave ripped through the ship's structure. A heartbeat later, it exploded. Ellie's crew cheered, but she wasn't done. She pushed the engines to max, flying straight through the wreckage, dodging incoming fire as the second Titan breaker locked onto them. Missiles incoming, Calloway shouted. Ellie banked hard, skimming the edge of the dreadnought's hull. Then she did the unthinkable. She diverted all power to the engines and rammed them directly into the Titan breaker's main reactor. The impact was devastating. The dreadnought's core ruptured, and the second Titan breaker was torn apart from the inside. The shockwave sent the Revenant spinning through space, but Ellie held the controls steady. Only one Titan breaker remained, and it was running. The death of High Commander Varric. On the Eternal Dominion, High Commander Varric watched his mighty fleet crumble. He refused to believe it. He had never lost. This was impossible. Sir, an officer whispered, voice trembling. We should retreat. Varric's claws dug into the command console. Retreat? Never. He turned toward the final Titan breaker. Tell them to fire everything at the Revenant. The officer paled. But sir, our own ships are still. I don't car, Varric roared. Fire. Now. The final Titan breaker fired its doomsday weapon. A planet cracker missile, capable of turning an entire world to dust. But Ellie was ready for it. She boosted the Revenant's engines, heading straight toward Eternal Dominion. Varric realized too late. The missile wasn't just heading for the Revenant. It was heading for him. A final blow. Ellie pulled the Revenant into a sharp climb at the last second. The planet cracker missile roared past them, headed directly for the Eternal Dominion. Varric barely had time to scream. The missile impacted the flagship, and in one massive explosion, High Commander Varric, his command, and the last remnants of the Starbreaker fleet were vaporized. Silence fell across the battlefield. Then, cheers erupted over the comms. Ellie let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. It was over. The Empire had lost. The dawn of a revolution. As the smoke cleared, Calloway turned to Ellie. You just took down an entire fleet, he said, still in shock. Ellie exhaled, glancing at the shattered remains of the Empire's once great army. This isn't just about us anymore, she muttered. People need to know that the Empire can bleed. She turned to her crew. We're not fugitives anymore, she said. We're a revolution. The GSC Revenant turned toward the stars, toward a future where humanity would no longer bow to the Empire. Ellie had started as a mechanic with a wrench. Now, she was the spark of something greater. And the war was just beginning. The end.